So, we have ourselves a really interesting new conversation at hand here. One given to us by Sportsnet's own Elliotte Friedman, who made an appearance on Czech TV's Donnie and Dhali earlier this morning, to which we are going to respond to here today. Now, by now, you know the drill. Donnie and Dhali, one of the best in the biz when it comes to talking sports and talking the Canucks, and they have a bunch of guests on every single episode. Today's episode was summarized by Vancouver Canucks News Summaries on Twitter, so big shout out to them for giving us the scoop here. You can see from the text there's a lot that is discussed by Friedman in his hit with Donnie and Dhali. There's a conversation about Vancouver, there's a conversation about Brad Marchand. It's all going to be there on Twitter if you want to read this yourself. But we're going to talk about what Friedman says about the Canucks. Skip over the Brad Marchand and Jonathan Toews conversation for now, because Friedge does go out there and speak out, firstly, about the Chytil injury that we saw earlier this morning. By the way, Chytil and Jonatan Berggren placed on the IR retroactive to October 19th yesterday. In fact, there were a bunch of Canucks roster moves made today, which we can just briefly gloss over. Don't think this needs an entire video about it for now, but Chytil and Berggren placed on the IR retroactive to yesterday. Mancini sent down to the AHL, Joseph Labate and Jimmy Schultz had been recalled from Abbotsford, and Nils Höglander has been placed on the LTIR retroactive to October 7th. Not only that, but the Canucks also called up Tom Willander and Nils Åman for now, after sending Jimmy Schultz back down to Abbotsford. Lots of roster moves going on today, mostly due to the maximizing of cap space, but for now, this is what Friedman speaks about in regards to that Chytil injury. Blindside is no longer part of the rule. They're just looking for avoidable head contact, and Chytil did not get hit in the head yesterday. A lot of people had said it's not a late hit, however it was a predatory hit, since that's what Tom Wilson does. Hopefully Chytil will be okay heading into the next few days here, but he is on the retroactive IR. Friedman then talks about center depth, saying this: the Vancouver Canucks have to ask every player on the roster to get 5% better, make up for the loss internally. Players available in trades are depth defensemen or forwards like Jonatan Berggren. Maybe there are some depth centers available, but the Canucks already have that. The Canucks are aware who is up there. They had been trying to acquire a center all summer. And Dhaliwal then mentions that the Canucks did try to get Marco Rossi. Now, Friedman isn't necessarily saying that, Vancouver should go after Berggren, but he is saying that if the Canucks want to tackle the center market one more time, this is one of the options they've got available to them. Burgers in Detroit, who unfortunately hasn't had the best start to his season so far. I mean, he has 0 points in only 2 games played. He hasn't played in all the games, and when you think about just what Berggren provides, he's not a center, he's a winger. Dual winger threat, so he can play on the left or the right, but Vancouver doesn't necessarily need much on that. Berggren, though, one of these guys that has already been tossed out there in trade discussions over the past few months. When you think about the Detroit Red Wings and the players that have stepped up in order to fill in roster spots, you talk about the big two, Michael Brenseg, Newgard, and Emmett Finney. You could even toss in Nate Danielson to that conversation as well. But the biggest narrative this preseason and training camp period was, hey, guys like JT Compher, Jonatan Berggren, y'all are gonna have to work just that little extra bit harder to make sure your jobs don't get taken from you at the National Hockey League level. They just haven't stepped up as much as you would prefer them to. Berggren especially was a guy that made headlines as a second-round pick that worked his way up and eventually became something noteworthy for Red Wings fans paying attention to a guy that could make the team at some point. And he did that. He was good 3 seasons ago-ish as a young guy that inspired hope. But then he kind of got outplayed, and he got sent down in the lineup, and he got sent down to Grand Rapids, and then there was a contract dispute, and then we had really no reason to believe that he would ever become a top 6 player like maybe some of us thought he would a few years ago. Now Jonatan Berggren is being tossed out there by Elliotte Friedman in trade talks regarding the Vancouver Canucks if you wanted to go down that avenue, which I don't think Vancouver should, but it was mentioned here briefly. For what it's worth, Friedman does expand more on the Red Wings and the Canucks. He goes out there and says this, that the Red Wings and the Canucks are better than he thought they would be. He also doesn't know if the Blackhawks defend well enough to be a playoff team, but Spencer Knight has made them a lot better. Yeah, I'd agree with that. We were just watching the Canucks and the Chicago Blackhawks a few nights ago. Spencer Knight's the reason the game even went to overtime in the first place. He was amazing. Now, with that in mind, there still are a number of key points that we can bring up for these teams here, particularly Detroit and Vancouver being as good as they have been. I mean, don't look now, but the Detroit Red Wings are one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference. They're tied for number 1 with Carolina, which is astounding. After that one loss, that stinker of a game to open things up, the Red Wings have turned it all around and have really started to put together positive results. Clutch wins in overtime, strong wins in regulation. They've been doing it all, and they've been scoring a bunch of goals too on top of that. I mean, they are one of the most productive goal teams in the league. Same with the Vancouver Canucks, who are actually tied with Detroit with 20 goals on the season, which is good enough to tie for, 9th in the NHL? It's not bad. Meanwhile, the Vancouver Canucks, if you take a look at their Western Conference ranking, they are in the top 8 so far, which is good. Maybe it's a little bit further down than where management wants them to be, but they are still there, and they're starting to string together some positive results here. Not bad, after a very, very disappointing first few games to open up the year. Vancouver, as long as they're able to get more contribution from everybody else, literally, if everybody's able to be just 5% better because of the injuries to Chytil and others, that will hopefully propel this team into staying in this competitive territory. By the way, yeah, Chicago, they've also got 8 points on the season. They're tied with Vancouver, albeit the Canucks have fewer games played. But with all this in mind, I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you feel about Elliotte Friedman's commentary on the Canucks and the Red Wings? Thoughts on Vancouver potentially going out there in the trade market looking for some more? Jonatan Berggren doesn't really move the needle much, but he is mentioned as a potential option there. Friedman, though, has some very positive things to say about the Canucks and the Detroit Red Wings, so obviously that is good for fans to hear from one of Sportsnet's top insiders. So if you enjoyed this video, feel free to hit the like button. If you didn't, the dislike button's down there for you. Comments help out with the algorithm, so I'd really appreciate it if you got involved there. I hope you enjoyed this video. Sign on, and bye.